Welcome to Kaleidoscope with me, Savithri Rodrigo, and our very first program for August. Although August was originally named Sextilis in Latin, in 8 BC, August was renamed August in honor of Augustus, the first emperor of the Roman Empire. And here's some trivia about August. It's the month that starts on the same day of the week as February in leap years and ends on the same day of the week as November every year. And it is also election week in Sri Lanka, with the citizenry having gone to the polls last Wednesday and the prospects of a new government emerging from those votes cast. So on People's Bank News Capsule this week, economist at the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, Savithri Rodrigo, speaks of the fiscal priorities for the new government, while the president of the National Chamber of Exporters of Sri Lanka, Ramya Veerakoon, says how exports have triumphed despite COVID-19 in July. Independent energy analyst Dr. Vidura Ralapanawa gives us Sri Lanka's best energy mix and in life in 60. Sam Pereira of Pereira Hussain Publishing House gives us some weekend reads. And on Selinko Life, let's talk. Matthew's Distinguished Professor of Jurisprudence from Albany Law School, Professor Anthony Farley, joins me from New York to give us his views on fighting slavery, writing real history in the US. Of course, there's lots more, so let's get on with the show.
Technology is key in moving forward to transform every challenging moment into a profit, where manual becomes digital, business becomes smart, and lives become smarter. People's Bank Online Corporate Banking. It's truly the change you need.
And so here's our People's Bank News Capsule this week. Fiscal issues would be the first hurdle Sri Lanka's newly elected government has to face. With COVID-19 having hit economies significantly, one of the priorities of our new government would be to ensure economic stability despite uncertainties around us. Economist at the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, Savithri Rodrigo, puts 3 interventions the government needs to prioritize.
The first focus area is fiscal consolidation. It is going to be a challenging task to achieve fiscal consolidation amidst the realities of COVID-19. Especially when you look at the expenditure side, the government will have to find COVID-19 relief measures while supporting much needed capital expenditure to keep the growth ticking. When we focus on the revenue side, it is evident that the government revenue collections are under stress right now. And with the external debt condition, this situation is made complicated. However, if the government is to focus on fiscal consolidation by achieving revenue mobilization and expenditure rationalization, this objective can be made a reality. The second focus area is digitization, which is supported by process improvements. When we look at how COVID-19 has really shifted the global trade landscape, we see there is demand for new products out there and the shifts in the supply chains as well as changes in the investment flows as well. So if Sri Lanka is to really capitalize on these opportunities, Sri Lanka has to be prepared by providing and upgrading for necessary digitalization efforts. The third intervention is something that's going to complement the overall economic growth agenda. That is the importance of having a very sound legal background to support the growth.
Sri Lanka's exports picked up in July to top $1 billion, and this is despite COVID-19. Apparel, tea, coconut, rubber, fruit, vegetables, and agricultural exports were the sectors that did exceptionally well. Here with some insights on the positive export growth is the President of the National Chamber of Exporters of Sri Lanka, Ramya Veerakoon.
The reason for this performance could be due to increase in demand for tea, coconut-based products and consumable food items. Exports in spices and essential oil sector has increased significantly. Seafood products too have increased. Rubber product exports show an increase due to the demand for health sector, such as surgical gloves and other medical products. However, apparel being an important export sector has not been able to perform well. Though some companies manufacture PPE as a new export item, it cannot substitute to other apparel categories with no long-term demand. Therefore, many apparel manufacturers need to diversify their product line from fashion to more core items which are in demand. Strong COVID control in Sri Lanka comparatively to most other competitor countries has given Sri Lankan exporters an edge. We were able to function with a short period of lockdown due to timely actions taken by the government, directing the health authorities and Triforces.
Sri Lanka is heavily dependent on apparel exports, and in the first half of 2020, apparel exports were down by 30%, with the US, however, continuing to be the top customer despite a 27% drop. Meanwhile, the LMD Nielsen Business Confidence Index registered an increase of 1 base point in July, which is an improvement from the same period last year. Business continues to cite COVID-19 as the most pressing concern, with political instability, high taxes and inflation also contributing to the confidence levels remaining low. Gold prices hit a record high once again this week, going up to $2,000 per ounce. But as MD of Lalita Jewellers Sellakumar Kandasamy mentioned last week on our show, predictions are for gold to move up to at least $2,500 eventually. And at the Colombo Stock Exchange today, the indices moved up by 1.1% this week, and the daily turnover averaged 1 billion rupees. At present, according to the Ceylon Electricity Board, the Sri Lankan power system has a total installed capacity of nearly 4,200 megawatts. It consists of 1,364 megawatts of large hydro plants, 2,115 megawatts of thermal plants, that is coal and oil, and 680 megawatts of non-conventional renewable power plants. Non-conventional renewable energy sources include 361 megawatts of mini hydropower plants, 124 megawatts of wind power plants, 168 megawatts of solar power plants, and 27 megawatts of biomass power plants. Independent energy analyst and consultant Dr. Vidura Ralapanava gave us an insight as to what the ideal energy mix could be.
We currently generate 2/3 of our electricity from coal and oil, a huge burden to the economy, environment and the rupee. Our demand will double in the next 10 years, and according to the last CEB generation plan, our renewable energy percentage is expected to decline to 30% by 2040, going against the global trends with a massive planned expansion of coal and gas. I believe 80% renewable energy by 2030 is a target that is achievable and is the least cost. It will add large-scale employment, attract FDI, and will be ecologically sound. This is also the government policy. This requires addition of 8 gigawatts of solar, wind and biomass with zero addition coal in the next decade. Current tender prices for solar and wind are less than 10 rupees a unit, while any new coal plant will cost over 18 rupees per unit on the starting year and will increase with the depreciation of the rupee. Large-scale renewables is the only path for cheap electricity and is the most sustainable for Sri Lanka.
The 10 rupees per unit of coal-based generation is borne by the country. Coal and oil are the most polluting sources of power. While all countries have set renewable energy targets, Sri Lanka seems to be reversing the trend by wanting to build more coal and gas plants, which goes against the move to decarbonize. However, if we gradually switch to renewable energy, the country may save in the medium to long term, both in terms of cost and environmental impact. While each of us has a responsibility to ensure that our actions are now prioritized towards ensuring a green planet, corporates around the world and in Sri Lanka too are working on green journeys to reduce their carbon footprint. Selinco Life recently laid the foundation stone for a purpose-designed, environmentally friendly branch in Piliandala, etching a further commitment to its corporate consciousness. It will have zero consumption of fossil fuel, electricity given its 20 kilowatt solar power system, and the rainwater harvesting and wastewater recycling facilities will minimize the use of pipe-borne water as well. A Mercedes on 3 wheels. That's what Lewis Hamilton turned his vehicle into when he crossed the finish line to win the British Grand Prix. The Mercedes suffered a last lap puncture but that didn't stop Hamilton from getting his record 7th British Grand Prix win. For you Elvis fans, if you had just over 1.3 million US dollars, you could have owned Elvis Presley's 1942 Martin D18 guitar. That's how much it sold for, and bought obviously by a wealthy fan. And if you're into tattoos, maybe the Dragon Girl could be the person to emulate. This 25-year-old from New South Wales spent nearly $120,000 on 600 tattoos and body modifications, including rather painful eyeball tattoos. This Nike ad took 4,000 hours of sports footage to bring on this powerful message of COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter at a time when professional sports is struggling amidst the pandemic. The 90-second ad features Colin Kaepernick, Serena Williams and LeBron James, and brings forth Nike's continued mission to highlight social issues that plague the world. And with that thought of how Black Lives Matter has become a cause that touches everybody, we end our People's Bank News capsule. But coming up next is Selinco Life Let's Talk, and we'll be discussing that issue further, fighting slavery and going beyond Black Lives Matter.
With Selinco Life Pension Saver, Sri Lanka's premier retirement plan, start planning for a retirement today. Selinco Life, a relationship for life.
And it's time for Selinco Life Let's Talk. Sri Lanka has just voted. We will now have a new government through a democratic process which we all take for granted. This democratic process is one which a majority of countries, or people for that matter, don't have, or even if they do, are rarely allowed to exercise. However, even though we articulate our democracy, our freedom and our rights, doesn't slavery still exist? It's a scourge that began centuries ago when, in the West, black people were shipped to the US from Africa to live in bondage, and where colonized countries have their citizens just because they were colored, subservient to their white masters. Sri Lanka, India, and much of Asia was no exception. Plantation workers brought in from South India lived, worked, and died in the most inhumane conditions. This was slavery, and today we look at those pictures and hear those stories and balk. But has anything changed? Modern day slavery still exists, but in different hues. The segregation, injustice, unfair policing and punishment, and the lack of basic rights to water, food, and education are all signs of slavery. It's a need for one segment of the population to keep another segment of the population under control. And hence, the reason for the Black Lives Matter movement to cascade with such force, not just in the US, but across the world. Professor Anthony Farley was honored as the 11th holder of the Hollywood Burns Chair in Civil Rights at CUNY School of Law, and he was the first recipient of the Anthony P. Farley Excellence in Teaching Award conferred by the Boston College Black Law Student Association. His work in legal theory and constitutional law in numerous publications and his thought-provoking insights appearing in the Yale and NYU publications, among others, has given traction to the Black Lives Matter movement and to the thought lines of black people in America and, of course, in a wider context: race, gender, policing, justice, and human rights. He may be the only law professor in the world whose work has been made into an opera by Goth soprano Lamar M. Lamar, whose show in New York was composed entirely of Anthony's work. On Selinco Life Let's Talk, this James Campbell Matthews Distinguished Professor of Jurisprudence at the University of Albany Law School, whose specialty is in constitutional law, criminal procedure and legal theory, and is a tenured member of the Boston College Law School, Professor Anthony Farley, joins us from New York explaining his quest in fighting slavery to write real history.
Slavery has always been a part of global history. It's not just in the US, whether you look in Africa, even in Sri Lanka, where we brought in plantation workers from South India, for instance, and kept them in slavery conditions. They lived, worked, and were killed in very inhumane conditions. But by erasing chapters of history, as is being done, as I see in the US right now, bringing down statues, for example, aren't part of your fundamentals being erased?
No, absolutely not. We are not erasing history. We're actually writing it now for the first time in the United States. That is, celebrating the slaughter that these monuments to slave masters represent actually erases history. Right? It erases history. The celebration of slaughter erases the history of that slaughter. It makes people think it's something else, and it invites repetition. So we're not erasing history in the United States. We are making it by pulling down the slave master monuments. I believe what we should do, and this is what I call for, is to leave the statues on the ground where they are, broken. Mark the dates when they were smashed with plaques, banners, prayers, songs. Let the broken pieces be the new monuments that accurately celebrate the proper history, right? The history of emancipation from slavery, not the history of enslavement.
So in your article, Perfecting Slavery, which appears in the Loyola University Chicago Law Journal, you say, and I quote, "Slavery is still with us. We are haunted by it and we are animated by it." What exactly do you mean?
Well, we have this progress narrative in the United States. We are told over and over and over again that moving from slavery to segregation to the discriminatory present represents some kind of progress. In my work, I write about this as a movement from white over black to white over black to white over black. Slavery to segregation to the discriminatory present is just white over black, white over black, white over black again, and that's not progress. It's the motionless movement of slavery perfecting itself. Slavery perfects itself when the enslaved themselves can no longer see it.
Hence, is Black Lives Matter, the movement, actually taking on the concept of modern slavery? Are you highlighting it, spotlighting it in some way?
Black Lives Matter taking on modern slavery is taking on something big. It's taking on slavery itself with an abolitionist bent, right? And the abolition of prison, the abolition of policing, the absolute end to the philosophy of punishment.
How is it taking on in the rest of the world? How is it impacting the rest of the world?
Well, I think, and I'm speculating now, and this is a speculation and it's a hope. I think if people see their own national struggles as something akin to the Black Lives Matter movement, which I consider to be an abolitionist movement, a movement that takes on social problems at the first level, like is asking first order questions and making demands, then this is a movement that can spread throughout the world. There's a brilliant thing that I think is being done in the name of abolition. When we talk about abolishing the prison and abolishing policing in the United States, we also have started to think about other things. Why is education made into a commodity? Why isn't that free and available to everyone? Why can't people always get water as a matter of right, and food, and housing, and asylum? These things shouldn't be made commodities, be made prizes, be made things that one has to earn. These are simply basic human rights.
Black Lives Matter, white over black, the segregation problems we see, the discrimination, the injustice, and the environmental degradation. What lies beyond that when you look at things globally?
Well, I think abolition clears the mind, right? It is a commitment to getting rid of the thing that you see as obviously contributing to social chaos and ill health. And that's great. It reveals, because you allow yourself to, when you commit like that, you allow yourself to see the interconnectedness of it all.
And Anthony's work has begun to appear on walls as graffiti. Here's one instance where he was quoted on the walls of a park in Seattle, Washington. Might be a thought for all of us to remember in these times when modern slavery is right under our very noses. Thank you, Professor Anthony Farley, for joining us from New York on Selingco Life. Let's talk.
With Selingco Life Pension Saver, Sri Lanka's premier retirement plan, start planning for a retirement today. Selingco Life, a relationship for life.
When we get back, we bring on Pereira Hussein Publishing House's Sam Pereira, and he gives us his best weekend reads. Jhumpa Lahiri said the thing about books is that they let you travel without moving your feet. And so, this weekend, just don't move your feet. Take these books into your hand and read, read, read. Sam Pereira of Pereira Hussein Publishing House gives us his 3 great weekend reads in Life in 60.
So, The Ripple Effect is a philosophical adventure novel by first-time author Gavin Major. Gavin Major is a Scotsman who lives in Sri Lanka and has been here for a long time. The main protagonist of his novel leaves Scotland on a motorcycle adventure. Pretty soon he runs into a misadventure and refocuses his compass on Sri Lanka. Observing people and places, the novel unfolds a quiet philosophical message. Another debut author whom we published, Sunil Tantirige, we published this book after the lockdown, is a very nostalgic look at his childhood home which he had to sell from Mount Lavinia. Sunil Tantirige is a real-life engineer who lives in Canada. He comes back to sell his house and then realizes that there are lots of memories he won't be able to share with his son. This book is an attempt at telling his son what his life in Sri Lanka was like. We have always been lucky with first-time authors, and Stay Daughter is no exception. Stay Daughter is written by debut author Yasmin Azad, and the story is set in the ultra-conservative Gulf Fort Muslim community and based on her life story. At puberty, she's pulled out of school and kept at home, but she manages to break out of these loving bonds of seclusion to not only complete her secondary education, but to go to Pereira University and get a university degree. If you only read one novel this year, this is the book that you should read.
I just can't wait to dig into those books. And by the way, if you do want to lay your hands on those books, just log on to pereirahussein.com. Order your books and they get delivered to your doorstep. I know you can't buy happiness, but you can buy books. But that's kind of the same thing, right? Thank you so much, Sam, for joining us from Life in 60 with your super weekend reads. And so, if you want to give us any feedback, suggestions or stories you'd like to see, please email us on kaleidoscopeweekly1@gmail.com. And if you'd like to watch Let's Talk, Life in 60, our news capsule clips, you'll find it on our playlist on YouTube. Or simply subscribe to Kaleidoscope with Savithri Rodrigo and join us weekly. So until next week, be sensible when you go out. It's important for yours and everyone else's safety. And here's your Kaleidoscope takeaway. Never regret a day in your life. Good days bring you happiness and bad days give you experience.